Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is Brent Struthers, STI-GA Director. This is the first in a series of webinars designed to assist service providers with getting active in the Shaken ecosystem, and we will begin in 1 minute. Okay, let's get started. Again, I'm Brent Struthers. I'm the Director of the Secure Telephone Identity Governance Authority, otherwise known as the STI-GA. Before we get started, I want to cover a few ground rules. During the discussion, I will encourage you to submit any questions you might have using the question feature on the webinar controls. Not the chat, but the question feature, please. We'll hold all the questions until the end of the presentation, and we'll try and get to as many of your questions as possible. At that point, to submit a question again, please type it in the questions box. The first question we got, and it'll be the same answer for everybody. Yes, we will make these slides available, and we're recording this webinar, and a link to the webinar will be distributed by email to all the registered participants. So that's the end of the initial announcements. Joining me today on this first slide you see, I've got Scott Bukowski, the STI-PA Director of Customer Service at iConnective, Alex Fenichel, and Doug, if you can, Doug will be joining us a little later in the presentation. Doug Rinaldi, founder of NetNumber, you just saw there. Ken Pollitt, Principal Product Specialist with Neustar, and Alex Fenichel, Senior Software Architect for TransNexus. Doug, if you could turn your camera off and go on mute, we'll bring you back when we're ready to talk to the vendors. That'd be great.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so let's get going. Sarah, do you want to go to the first slide, the STI-GA policy slide, please? Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about today is policy, and then we'll bring Scott Bukowski on to talk a bit about registration, then we'll bring the vendors on to talk about the testing and the registration process as well. So the STI-GA policy, there's a number of policies that the STI-GA has created, and before you look to register, you might want to get familiar with some of these policies for your company. Sarah, can you go to the next slide, please? The first of the policies that I want to get you familiar with is the funding policy. The funding policy is how we fund the STI-PA and STI-GA, and when I say Shaken ecosystem, those are two of the three main parts of the Shaken ecosystem, the third really being the certification authority. So the STI-PA, run by iConnective, and the STI-GA, currently ADIS, have different roles in this ecosystem, and each is funded through the STI-PA fees. Those fees are what service providers pay following at the tail end of the registration process. Those fees are due each calendar year after you register. There's a single invoice for each calendar year, and the fees are not prorated. These are all STI-GA board decisions. That means that if you join in January, you will pay the same amount that you would pay if you joined in December. And again, you will receive that invoice for 2020 if you register in 2020, and you'll get another invoice for 2021. So the fees are based on a percentage of the 499A telecom revenues. The 499A is an annual form you file with the FCC that tells the FCC what your telecom revenues are. They base things like universal service payments, TRS payments off of that. The PA uses those same revenue figures to determine what you'll pay as part of the Shaken ecosystem. There's a minimum payment, a maximum payment. So no matter what the contribution factor says when you apply it to your revenues, the minimum you will pay is $825 per year. The maximum any provider will pay for at least 2021 is $283,950. Those are going to be your larger providers. The 2021 contribution factor, you can see that on the screen. If you'd like to compare that to 2020, you can go to the STI-GA webpage, look up the policy, and the policy will explain the 2020 factor and the 2021 factor, how all of that works. If you are registered already and you paid 2020 expenses, paid 2020 fees, you'll note that they're probably lower than what you're going to pay for 2021. The reason for that is largely because we had in 2020 we had 4 backstop providers that determined at the beginning of the year that they would cover the cost for the STI-GA and PA that were not covered through other service provider fees. And so because we had those 4 backstop providers funding most of the GA and PA expenses, the costs for other providers were kind of artificially low for 2020. So yes, your cost for 2021 will likely go up based on a little bit higher contribution factor. Can we go to the next slide, Sarah? Let's funding policy. Let's talk SBC token access policy. That's everybody's favorite policy to discuss lately. It has 3 prongs to the token access policy. This is the policy that tells you if you can qualify to get essentially a certificate that you can use to sign calls. The token is what you get from the PA. You take that token that you get from the policy administrator, you take that token to a certification authority and get your certificate that you use to sign calls. In order to get that token, you have to be vetted by the PA, and here's what the policy administrator of the PA is looking for. They're looking to make sure you have a current 499A on file with the FCC. Again, the PA uses that data to determine your fees. They're looking to see if you have an operating company number, an OCN. And thirdly, currently, they're looking to see if you have direct access. So they need some kind of proof that you have direct access to telephone numbers from the NAMPA or the National Pooling Administrator. That's the portion of the policy that has recently changed, or will change actually. The STI-GA board recently voted to change that 3rd prong from direct access to telephone numbers to the dash you see there. Once the robocall mitigation program certification portal, and that's a mouthful, is available, that's what the FCC is going to set up for providers to file their robocall mitigation programs. Once that portal is available, and that's supposed to be no earlier than March 31st of next year, the board has determined that direct access to telephone numbers requirement will be replaced with a new requirement that the service provider has certified with the FCC that they've implemented STI-GA or they comply with the robocall mitigation program requirements. We don't know what those requirements are. The FCC is going to put those together, I think, between now and the time they make that portal available. So there'll be some announcements there. But you've got to have one or the other. Either you've implemented STI-GA and you've confirmed that with the FCC, or you're going to comply with that robocall mitigation program, whatever requirements the FCC puts together there. And then you'll be listed in the database. So the STI-PA will be able to check that FCC database to make sure that your company name is in it before allowing you to register. If you want to know a little bit more about that certification portal, that robocall mitigation program, you can check out the FCC order. The docket number is listed there, 1797. So have your attorneys take a look at that, and that'll give you a little bit more information on that. Okay, next slide. That's the SBC token access policy, the revocation policy. So once you've gotten your token, yes, your token can be revoked. The board has created a revocation policy. The STI-GA ecosystem is governed by the STI-GA board. The STI-GA board is a very diverse set of both telecommunications providers and associations, industry representatives. The board takes very seriously its role to protect the security and integrity of the STI-GA framework. If you work with the board at all, you'll hear that phrase security and integrity a lot. It's not their primary goal, it's one of their primary purposes. is to make sure that the STI-GA framework is both secure and it continues with its integrity. Any authorized service provider that is found misusing its STI certificate can be identified, and they can and they can be removed from the ecosystem by the revocation of their token. Again, you use your token to get a certificate to sign calls. If you don't have a token, you can't get a certificate and you can't sign calls. And so the board can direct the STI-PA to revoke that token. That's in the STI participant agreement that you will sign with the PA, and the board can direct them. So any provider that's subject to revocation will absolutely be informed and given an opportunity to provide comment to the STI-GA board. The revocation process is actually posted online. So if you want to go take a look at that, you can go to the STI-GA website, look under resources, and you can find that there as well. So again, once you get the token, that's not the end of the story. You've got to use it appropriately, or you can have your token revoked. Now let's go to the next slide. We'll kind of figure out what appropriately means. Okay, so here's some causes for revocation. You can, let's say you're a service provider and you're not adhering to the SBC token access policy. Maybe you've not filed a current 499A form. You've registered, you filed it last year, but you've not got a current one, and the STI-PA is looking for your current one. You don't have it. You can have your token revoked for that. Funding requirements. Obviously, if you're not paying your fees, you don't pay those fees, you can have your token revoked. Shaken specifications. So if you're not familiar with the ATAS specifications, ATAS 10,087, I'm sorry, 10,074, 80 and 84. If you're not familiar with those, you should get familiar with those, because those say, here's how you should use your certificate to sign calls, giving it A, B, C level attestation. If you're given A level attestation to lots of calls that should not have A level attestation, that are clearly fraud or clearly illegal robocalls, you can be, the board can be told about that, and we'll go through the revocation process. Also, obviously, if a court or the FCC directs the board to revoke a token because some providers been in violation of some federal law related to caller ID authentication, we'll also obviously pay attention to the FCC or the court order in that case. All right, next slide. That's the revocation policy. So if you do get your token revoked, there is something you can do about it. Within 5 days of notification, and I will send you that notification, within 5 business days of that notification, you can appeal that to the STI-GA board. If you don't wish to appeal, then you can start the reinstatement process. There's no long 6-month, 3-month, 9-month suspension period or anything like that. There's a reinstatement process that follows revocation. Any provider that loses an appeal or chooses not to appeal can seek reinstatement. What is reinstatement? Reinstatement involves the following. You as a service provider have to come up with a written plan of action to remedy whatever issues were identified by the board, the things that led to your token being revoked. So you come up with that written plan of action. You put it in a letter on company letterhead. You detail the steps that your company has taken to comply with your own written plan of action, and you have a corporate officer sign it, and then you'll send it to the STI-GA. You'll send it to me, and then the board will take a look at that, determine if they think you've actually remedied the things that were found to be wanting through the revocation process. And if they are, then you can be reinstated, and you'll go right to the STI-PA and register again. So again, the reinstatement process can happen day 1 after your token's can begin day 1 after your token's been revoked. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. We're going to talk about the registration process, and I'm going to bring on Scott Bukowski, who again is the Director of Customer Service for the STI-PA or iConnected. Scott, thank you for joining us. Appreciate you being here.
No problem. Thank you, Brent.
So Scott and I are going to talk a bit about the registration process. I'm going to give you the high-level stuff, and Scott's going to give you some more details. So let's go to the next slide in the registration process, please, Sarah. One more, sorry. There you see Scott's name. It's very nice. Okay. Here's some things that you, as a service provider, want to make sure you have in your hip pocket before you come to register. You want to make sure, obviously, you have your OCN ready. You want to make sure you have some type of proof of direct access to numbering. Scott, in terms of proof of direct access to numbering, what are providers giving you?
Well, what we're going to do is validate that the service provider does have access to numbering through NANPA and NPA.
Okay, thank you. And then you also want to make sure you have your 499A form that's been filed with the FCC. Some providers have multiple 499As. Some might do it by state. What the PA is looking for is your telecom revenues for the entire country. So you'll need to make sure you have those numbers set. Again, that's what's used to determine your PA fees. And if you have any concerns about the proprietary nature of those numbers, I won't see those. The STI-GA, the STI-GA board won't see those. Only iConnective as the PA will see those revenues, and only for the purpose of figuring out your annual fee. They're not shared with anyone else. That's correct, right, Scott?
That's correct. And if you have multiple forms, we ask that you provide the aggregate dollar amount for those forms.
Right, thank you. Okay, let's go to the next step. We're going to get in a little bit more detail here. That was just very high level stuff that you want to make sure you have before you register. Coming in the door with that stuff ready to go, make your registration process go a lot more smoothly. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to access this portal. It's on the STI-PA homepage, authenticate.iconnective.com, and you're going to start providing your required data. Now, I'm just going to give up here and let Scott take over and talk about the vetting process and how that works. And then we'll talk about testing after that. Scott, all yours.
So the most important thing you need to give us is your OCN number. In addition to the OCN, we ask for your company information, such as the name, the country, the address, city, state, and zip. We ask for your registrant contact information, same type of information, first and last names, email address, and phone number. Then what you do is you're going to pick your login credentials. So you actually pick your user ID. That user ID must be 8 characters in length, cannot contain any spaces, and it cannot be your email address. You're going to verify that you're not a robot and click submit. Once you click submit on your form, your address is going to be checked for, make sure it's okay. So you're going to get a link in the email that you need to reply back to. Once you click on the link in the email and confirm it, that's going to bring us to the next few bullet items to where we look for some additional information about you and your company. So we're going to ask for some additional data. Are you going to use any additional OCNs when requesting the SBC tokens? If you are, then we can set up your account accordingly and configure it to include all of those additional OCNs. Another piece of information that we require is the SBC token expiry timer value. This is the validity period that the application will use for all SBC tokens issued to your account. This is an account level setting. The minimum value is 1 day, while the maximum value is 2 years. This is a configurable parameter, so you can request that this be changed in the future if needed. Billing information. We will require your billing contact's first and last name, their email address, phone number, street address, city, state, and zip or postal code. We're going to need your IP addresses to be whitelisted in our staging and production systems. We'll send you a form to complete and whitelist those IPs accordingly. We'll also need your service zip code. The service zip code is associated to your OCN and it's used for tax calculations. Then you're going to get into testing. Testing is done in the staging system. We will provide you with a test plan and a test evaluation form so that you can follow the plan, complete the form, and email it back to us once you're completed. Once you're done with your testing, the last step is that you would need to sign the STI participant agreement, and that's done electronically.
Okay, Scott, thank you. Appreciate that. We're going to get into a bit more on testing, and then we'll bring our vendors on. I've actually already got a question, and I want to hit this right up front. One of the first questions I saw is how long does it take on average to get through the registration process from beginning to end, or is there an average?
So it depends. We've had customers complete it in a week, and we've had customers take a few months. It seems that if you have all of your information in order and you're able to supply everything to us in a timely fashion and get right into the testing, then you're done pretty quickly. However, if you are struggling to find your 499A and you know, that kind of holds up the process, we've seen a lot of delays with instances like that.
Okay, so again, come to the PA with your documentation ready to go, and it's going to be a lot easier process for you. In terms of testing, if I'm not wrong, I think service providers are probably spending the most amount of their registration time in this phase of the process, right?
That is true.
Okay, so like you said, testing's done in the staging system. You've got your readiness evaluation plan. We're going to talk a little bit about using an approved vendor to get through the registration process. What is an approved vendor?
An approved vendor is someone that has been vetted and has the ability to provide the software to keep the tokens generated for a service provider.
Okay, thank you. So service providers that are using an approved vendor, there's a number of approved vendors. You can see those there: TransNexus, Newstar, Metaswitch, Sansei, NetNumber, Intelliquent. They're all CAs as well, except for Intelliquent. So you've got a number of approved vendors listed there. We've got a few of the vendors that will join us in just a little bit. I'm gonna go to the next slide. This is just a Q&A slide. So I'm gonna ask Scott a few questions, put the spotlight on you, and see if we can drill down into the onboarding a little bit. So we already talked about how long onboarding will take. One of the things we talked about also coming to the PA with your ducks in a row before you start the registration process. Does a service provider need to identify a certification authority that they're going to use before they start the registration process?
That's not required before they begin to register. However, they should have a plan and be able to communicate one by the end.
Okay. In case somebody wants to look at the list of folks that have registered to date, is there a list somewhere that they can find?
Yes, our homepage has links to both approved CAs and service providers on the homepage.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think it's if you look under the service provider link, it's right there. It's the first link, and I think to date we've got 64 or so service providers registered. What about the participant agreement? If somebody wants to have their legal team take a look at that, do they need to wait till they finish the registration process to get a copy of that? Is that ready earlier? Where can they get that?
So they can obtain a copy at the STI-GA website. If you go there and you query STI participant agreement, you should be able to find it, download it, and review it.
Yep, and actually on the GA website, and maybe we'll change this. I believe it is called the STI-PA Service Provider Agreement, and it's under the Resources tab. So if you're looking for it, you don't see Participant Agreement, look for the STI-PA Service Provider Agreement. So like I said, maybe I'll have to make that change. Okay. And I think you talked about having multiple OCNs. If a company's got multiple OCNs, and a lot of companies do, how do they choose which one? Do they need multiple accounts if they've got different subsidiaries? How do they work that?
So you don't need multiple accounts. The first OCN that you give to us during the registration process becomes your main OCN and actually your account number. Any other additional OCNs can be captured and incorporated into that same account.
Okay, that's helpful. IP addresses. You guys do whitelist IP addresses. What are you looking for? Are you looking for a range of 2 million IP addresses, or what are you looking for there?
We're looking for the primary contacts that are going to be contacting the system. You can have more than one. We need to whitelist for both production and staging. So we do have a form that we provide you that has fields to list ranges or single IPs to be whitelisted so you can get access.
Okay, and if those change, can they change the IP addresses in the portal? How do they do that?
You can't change it. You need to contact us, have us whitelist the changes.
Okay, but they can be changed.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Wonderful. I think the last question, then we'll get the vendors online here. In terms of the API spec, so people can see what they need to build to, is that available?
That is available. You can email STI-PA@iconnective.com and request a copy, and we'd be happy to provide you with one.
Wonderful. Okay. I know we've got more questions rolling in, but I want to bring our vendors on. So Sarah, could you go to the next slide, and I will introduce our vendors, our approved vendors. Actually, one more down. Okay, so I've got 3 folks, Doug, Ken, Alex. If you could turn on your cameras, that'd be great, and get ready to unmute. Doug Rinaldi, the founder of NetNumber, is with us as well. He's one of the approved vendors. Ken Pollitt's principal product specialist with Newstar, with us as well. And then Alec, I always try and say Alex. Alec Fenichel, sorry about that, senior software architect with Transnexus. So we have 3 of our approved vendors on today, and we're just going to do a Q&A with the vendors. And before I start into the questions and answers with you all, let me just say, opening salvo, do you guys have any responses you want to give to anything that Scott said? Do you think, or probably me, do you have anything you think I said wrong? Or anything you want to comment on that we've already talked about?
No, I think everything's been spot on.
All right, well, let's start with, go ahead, Doug.
Perfect.
All right, good. Let's start with the first question, the one I already asked Scott. So from your perspective as an approved vendor, what is an approved vendor, and how does being an approved vendor or working with an approved vendor help service providers navigate the registration process? And I won't, any one of you guys wants to take it on, let's go.
Yeah, I can start. This is Ken from Newstar. So, we're pretty much the full solution provider from a, STIR-SHAKEN perspective, including the certificate management. So, it's our job and our role to help our carrier customers to onboard as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. So, the approved vendor has helped significantly since we had been through the process a number of times, and it has now allowed our new customers to to expedite the process of getting through the PA registration. So that's one thing. The other item is on the IP whitelisting. That was initially a challenge with a hosted service offering, where you had the hosted provider having kind of their own. Well, first of all, the vendors not having PA access, right? They're not service providers, so they couldn't really get access to the PA system. So we worked something for getting test access initially, but now subsequently, I think we've worked cooperatively to get the ability for customers of ours that maybe resell service, or being able to work with hosted service customers more directly. So that's a big plus. So between that and the actual testing process and having to have everyone go through it again with the same kind of vendor, those 2 things, hopefully people will find will make things as efficient as possible.
Anyone else? Okay.
Yeah, just from a registration process, I think it can make things a lot easier. We know exactly what the PA is going to ask for before they ask for it. We've done this many times, so we can kind of help get everything together. And then from a testing perspective, totally bypass all the testing, all the APIs handled for you. It really, I think, makes things a lot easier. And it's not even just from the registration process, the ongoing process of getting new SBC tokens and certificates with those SBC tokens really can be not something you have to worry about. So I think for most service providers, it really helps. And I think from a PA perspective, the approved vendors, we all work with the PA directly, kind of on behalf of those requests. So when there's an issue, when something's changed and an API request fails, maybe a credential was removed, we can kind of come to you and tell you exactly what the problem is and exactly what you need to do, and not kind of have this back and forth with support that you might otherwise have, because we know what to expect from all the API requests and responses.
Yeah, I'll provide some feedback from a slightly different perspective. I agree with everything that Ken and Alex just mentioned. NetNumbers also approached this as a complete solution provider. So interfacing with the PA is, of course, a requirement for NetNumber as a vendor in this space. I think if I put myself in the shoes of a service provider, this is a classic make or buy decision. There's, of course, work associated with learning the protocols, going through the testing, living with the direct relationship with the PA. If you have no choice, then you do that work. But if you have the choice to buy it at a fraction of the cost that you would spend to do it on your own, I think that's the benefit of an approved vendor. Approved vendors are approaching this with the vision that we're doing this for lots of customers, so we spread the cost over a large base. Alternatively, as a service provider, you eat the whole cost of living with that relationship, those protocols. So unless you're getting overcharged, it seems like an easy decision. Let somebody else do it.
So let me ask you, Scott, is there a difference between the amount of time it's taking for those service providers working with an approved vendor versus, those service providers doing it on their own?
It's much faster using a vendor.
Okay, so again, if you're, and I know we'll have folks, none of the folks on this webinar will do this, but I know others will. So if you're not listening today, make sure that if you're going to come in last minute and try and register with the STI-PA on, late in June next year, use a vendor, because it's going to get you through more quickly than trying to do it on your own. But again, nobody on this webinar, these are all responsible people, would do that. Everybody's going to make sure they register early. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's important. And one other thing, Brent, I think it's important that there is like two phases in I think in the registration process. One that the service provider themselves has to take kind of ownership of. That's really the upfront piece of establishing the relationship with the GA and PA, and also the validation process there for getting into the ecosystem. And then the phase where they can really lean on their vendors. And from what I'm hearing from Scott, it's good that we've seems like we're doing a good job at expediting that process for folks. So some folks I think you just need to understand. I think there's benefit and also the need for them to have that upfront piece and that upfront relationship, and then they can work and lean on the vendor to carry them through an efficient way to get up and running.
Right, it's a good point, Ken. I want to make sure that people realize that just because you're working with an approved vendor does not mean you still have to qualify as a service provider on your own merit to gain access to SBC tokens. You can't just go find a vendor and say, get me an SBC token. You have to qualify as an individual service provider. The account will be created, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, in your service provider name. It's just the vendor will work with you to help you get through the process more smoothly.
That's correct.
Okay, so again, you still got to do all this stuff on your own merits as a service provider. Okay, some of the differences for when a service provider registers on its own versus working through a vendor. Can you guys talk a little bit about that? They don't have to memorize the API spec. We know that.
Yeah, I mean, there's some, as Doug was saying, I mean, there's investment that you have to make to understand the APIs and the interfaces that have been defined out in the industry. And in many cases, from a carrier perspective, some of this is, not day-to-day stuff that they're dealing with, especially when we're getting into, JSON web tokens and, and the PKI aspects of this. It's not something that the voice, let's say the voice operations folks and the folks who are really on the hook to deploy STIR/SHAKEN aren't, dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So, I piggyback on what Doug says is that, you definitely have to make some investment there, and it can be done, but there is a trade-off there to someone who's now a vendor in this space and who's gone through the process. I mean, you definitely will have some. There's no doubt you'll have some efficiency there.
Alec, Doug, you want to chime in or just agree with everything Ken said?
Yeah, I exactly what Ken said. There's and I will say there hasn't been much, but there have been, especially early on, a few changes to the API, and that again, kind of the continued maintenance of this can be something that you don't have to worry about when you're using a solution that kind of has to deal with that. We have to deal with that instead.
Yeah. And I know early on I dealt with a couple of providers that were having difficulties with the IP whitelisting because maybe they worked from home from times, or they had dynamic IP addresses, et cetera. Working with the vendor would help with that, I assume?
Yes, of course, because we have to maintain connectivity. So that's our job. We've got operations teams and support teams that monitor it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's the difference between actually being in the business all the time versus kind of a one-time effort of playing around with it. We're all in this every day.
Well,
I think that kind of goes back to your statement around the security and integrity. I mean, that as a vendor, we take that very serious too. So it's a matter of, having a solid process, respecting the nature of the value of what an SBC token is getting you, and what we're trying to address here, in terms of bad actors and this problem we have with these robocalls.
And I will vouch for each of the panelists here that, Alec, Doug, and Ken all have been involved in the IPNNI standards work on SHAKEN for quite some time, longer than I have been involved in it. So they're much more knowledgeable than I am on all that stuff. So no sense of pride there. These guys all know what they're doing. And so they can answer those questions as well, I'm sure, for providers if you've got questions about how STIR works. So they'll probably do that pro bono even. All right, well, at least a couple. Doug shaking his head. All right, let's see. After the registration process, I won't get too much into the after the registration process, and we'll get the audience questions in a bit, but after the registration process, does the service provider continue to use their approved vendor? Do they have to continue to use their approved vendor? Can they? What do they use you guys for other than just helping them through the registration process?
I think it goes back to, I think everyone has said they're pretty much a full solution provider here. So, I mean, it doesn't stop, with helping them through the registration process, getting the token, and there's a whole range of other services that we each offer minimally, the certificate aspect of this. So from a turnkey perspective, you're getting to the point of being able to get up and running and signing and verifying your phone calls as soon as you can, and as efficiently as possible. So that's definitely, I think, a key benefit that has here. And I think Alec made a good point about the ongoing aspect of this. I mean, and we're still in a somewhat fluid environment where, we're learning as we're going and, getting more and more operational experience and so forth, other use cases that pop up, and, different types of entities that may or should or should not participate directly in the system. So what that requires then is certain changes along the way that will affect the implementation of either the PA or other aspects here. So that's another key point. I think from an ongoing perspective, you've got that aspect too from the vendors that provide the full solution here.
Yeah, I would say from an ongoing perspective, service providers have the luxury now of just kind of ignoring the complexity of managing shaken certificates. You can just outsource it to the vendors that are in this business. And as a result of that benefit, you can turn your attention to the work that you really are obligated to do, which is analyze the call use cases in your network to identify which calls should appropriately get A attestation, which should get B attestation, which should get C, what's the orig ID you're going to assign for each of those calls as they originate in your network. Those are the details of living with stir shaken, of appropriately signing your calls, setting your attestation, and of course verifying calls as they come in. But the real work here is in the call processing. The back-end infrastructure of interfacing with the PA, managing those certs, can literally be moved to the background as you just assume, of course that's there. You pay the fee. We've already got a very dynamic market, lots of vendors, so price has already gotten the benefit of competition. So I think service providers really are in quite a luxurious position now of interview the vendors, figure out who's got the infrastructure that meets your needs, and you can immediately turn your attention to figuring out how to appropriately sign your calls.
Okay, let's see. I think we're about ready to get into the audience questions, and I've got a number of them. But I'm going to give you guys one last chance. Anything else you wanted to bring up before we start hitting the audience questions to help folks through the registration process, or help them determine whether they want to go it on their own or use a vendor?
I think I would just say that you know, we were part of some of the acceptance testing back in November of 2019. We've been there right from the beginning, and you know, I just want to say that, you know, things have come a long way. I mean, from where we started, and it's basically been from a collaboration effort, and you know, gathering feedback and listening to feedback and implementing things that made the most sense. So you know, I'm quite pleased, and hopefully others are seeing that out there, that, you know, from when we, you know, when the governance structure was fully, you know, kind of launched toward the end of last year, that, you know, from a vendor standpoint, you know, a lot of progress has been made in a positive way in working together. I think many found the process very intimidating initially, and you know, I think hopefully now, between the changes and, you know, these kind of sessions and information and the reaction and changes coming, you know, through, and by the GA and PA listening to, you know, other dimensions here, I think is just definitely, we've seen a lot of good positive change over the past year, and I hope that, you know, I see that continuing, and hopefully others are recognizing that, who are, you know, going through that process.
Geez, I should just end on that note, and that was such a positive note, but I'm not going to end yet. The one thing I want to point out is that I call this an ecosystem. It is an ecosystem, and that it's evolving. There's a lot of changes happening. The shaken standards continue to evolve. The PA systems will likely continue to evolve. So, you know, once you're in and registered as a service provider, you're still going to have to deal with changes to this. Dealing with folks that are familiar with those changes coming out of the IP&I standards work, you know, is probably going to be very helpful. So if it sounds like I'm steering you to work with these vendors, well, I am, because I know they know what they're doing, and they can help you keep abreast of all the changes that are happening. Some of those changes, you know, we're going to be talking about possibly doing cross-border signing with Canada. There's things like delegate certificates that we'll be talking about, maybe even toll-free stuff. There's a lot of changes coming up the pipe, and you know, the vendors, I'm pretty sure, will help keep you abreast of that. You can call me and ask me all those questions too, but I'll be a little slower in getting back to you, because, you know, I'm one person, and like I said, I don't know as much as Alec, Doug, or Ken. You guys want to comment on any of the changes going on, or let's move on to audience questions?
That could be a long discussion.
Yeah,
we should ask some. I think we should get some audience questions.
All right, let's get some audience questions. So a few questions. This one, let me open up my questions panel. So we're doing this real time, folks. So we're going to do the best we can. This is the first question. Let's see. Is token revocation and FCC certification linked in any way? Does revocation automatically remove a service provider from the FCC certification database? I'm guessing that's a question for me, since nobody else probably wants that one. No, they're not linked. We haven't linked, the STI-GA board hasn't linked them to the FCC in any way. So no, I don't know what the FCC is going to do in terms of their certification portal yet, or their program. I think as a service provider and a vendor, you're going to want to watch that through the FCC. You can go to their website and watch comments and watch if they have draft orders, whatever they're going to do there. But that's all going to happen through the FCC. The GA board has not tied revocation into any of the FCC processes at this point, other than the fact that if the FCC decides they want to go after some provider for misbehaving, maybe they've been flagged by the U.S. Telecom traceback group or something like that, and they want to tell the GA board that we should look at that and possibly revoke the token, then yes, we will take a look at that as the GA board. But no, it's not officially linked in any way, shape, or form. So that's my first question. Let's go to the next one. I'm reading in a tiny little window here. Hold on. Okay, so the fee, I think, Scott, this is for you. If somebody has a number of subsidiaries underneath a holding company, should they register? Is the fee based on the holding company's revenues, or is it based on all the individual subsidiary revenues? Have you dealt with that? Have you had to work with that yet?
I'm not really sure. I haven't experienced that as of yet. I don't know if you want to link in Bob Grant and see if he has.
Yeah, Bob, if you're on, have you dealt with that? Bob Grant also works with the STI-PA, and he's on as kind of a backup when we get, make sure we get answers to all the questions. So Bob, if you're on, if you want to join us. There he is.
There I am, okay.
So here, I'll read the exact question for you. It says, if a company files with the STI-PA at the holding company level with multiple operating company numbers under that one account, is the fee calculated at the holding company level by adding up all the 499A data, or does the minimum amount apply per OCN? So is it, you add up all the data, is there a contribution factor applied to the total number, or do you apply a minimum per OCN, assuming they're each going to fall under the minimum?
No, so it should flow all up into the one holding company. So it should be one fee and one vetting process. So we talked about the multiple OCNs, right? Whatever your total aggregate OCN and 499 contribution is, that's how the fee should be determined. And then in terms of how you implement, it could be the one OCN, or it could be the multiple ones to provide multiple tokens based on how you want to go about implementing.
Great, thank you. Hopefully that answers that question. Another question, does this apply to Canadian ISPs? No, the stuff we're talking about today is US based. That said, I suspect that some of the stuff is going to be a little bit similar between the US and Canada. We're both following the same shaken standards, but no, this stuff does not directly apply to what you're going to be seeing up in Canada. Although again, next year we may be talking about cross-border call signing, so from US to Canada and Canada to the US. So I won't even give Ken the microphone, because Newstar is the PA up in Canada. So I won't even give Ken the microphone to talk about that one. He can do his own web.
I'm staying
quiet. All US stuff. Okay. Let's see. Once the new SBC token access policy, which requires not direct access to telephone numbers, but requires actual the FCC certification, once that's in effect, will the OCN still be required? And the answer to that is yes. We continue to use the OCN And anybody want to explain why we still use the OCN? Where it is in the certificate?
Oh, yeah, that's in the certificate, the OCN is what uniquely identifies the holder of the certificate. So when you misbehave, we know who misbehaved by that OCN. So the OCN is a critical part of the Shaken ecosystem.
Okay. This is again on the SBC token access policy, and I'll try and read this here. The new requirement creates a circular issue where to get a STI-Shaken certificate token, you have to deploy STI-Shaken. However, to deploy STI-Shaken, you need to have a token / certificate. Any idea how this will be addressed by the GA? So I will tell you this. I've heard this a lot from people in the last couple of weeks, and that the GA board has created a requirement that a provider get a certification with the FCC. And you get that certification in one or two ways. You either implement STI-Shaken, which you know, or you implement a robocall mitigation program, and you have that certified by the FCC. A lot of service providers, I've talked to service providers, and they said, well, we don't know if we want to go through the expense of creating a robocall mitigation program. We'd like to tell the FCC that we've implemented STI-Shaken, and therefore we won't need to implement a robocall mitigation program. The policy the GA board has set out, that's not going to change, at least initially, right now. What the FCC is going to require in terms of that certification, nobody really knows yet. So if you have concerns, if you want to see the FCC, you know, change their certification requirement or create a certification requirement that allows you to say, hey, I'm going to register with the PA tomorrow, and that'll be my, you know, I've done everything else for STI-Shaken, all I've got left to do is register with the PA. You know, I've got my AS, I've got my VS, I can do all that stuff, I've done testing, whatever. If you want to tell the FCC that that should be allowable for your certification with them, hey, that's fine with me. Go talk to the FCC. They've got to make they've got to define that certification process and what is a valid certification over the next 6 months or so. So definitely go talk to them about it. The GA board's not planning, at least at this point, of making more changes to deal with that issue to the SBC token access policy.
And I think one point of clarification on that is that the STI-PA access that you need, right, is for getting an SPC token, which allows you to get a Shaken certificate from a Shaken certificate authority. There's nothing that prevents you from implementing an AS and a VS and maybe even a KMS and using self-signed certificates in production calls. In fact, that's how Shaken started, was self-signed certificates being deployed between the large carriers. That just doesn't scale, so that's kind of the need for these CAs. So I can't comment on other vendors, but at least, you know, we implement test certs that do not require SBC tokens, do not require you register with the PA, but in every other way are exactly the same as a normal cert. They're just not going to be trusted. But you know, with that, you can go through all your testing, implement STI-Shaken in your network, and then all you do, you flip a switch and say, now I'm going to use a real cert, and you'll get checks on carriers' phones. So I don't know that it is really a dependency that needs to be resolved in the order of kind of first registering with the PA and then implementing Shaken. You can absolutely implement Shaken really in its entirety. And most carriers will accept self-signed certs if you give them the root cert that you used or the self-signed cert if there wasn't a chain in it. Most carriers will accept that still to this day.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that? I'm not going to push anybody doing self-signed certs, but anybody else want to comment on that?
No, I just hope that we're in I think we're still in a transition period here. So I think we know what the end goal is here, but again, you know, I agree with Alec that, you know, we'll do things to support testing and such, and people can get as ready as they want, you know, prior to, you know, going through the full registration process if that's what they, you know, what they want to do. But there's other complications with the, you know, the self-signed certs or, you know, non-approved CA certs, because there's really no mechanism to get those easily. And yes, so not to dwell on that, I think we know where we're going. So we're kind of in a transition mode. We're hoping, I think policy could help that to some extent, but we're targeting June. We're hoping by June that, you know, that's where we'll be in a more happy place with that.
Yeah, from net numbers perspective, we give our customers the ability to test out the whole solution in our staging environment. It's the same software, it's the same STI-CA root services functionality. It's just using an infrastructure that's not the production infrastructure registered with the PA. So to Alex's point, we can allow a service provider to test every aspect of stir-shaken in their network using shaken certs that just are not linked to the policy administrator. So then when they're ready, they literally switch them. It's flip a switch, and now your cert is signed through the certificate authority that's registered with the PA. We didn't do the self-sign cert model because we thought it was a bit of a distraction, but we understand that was an early effort, and we're trying to move. I think we're all trying to move the industry quickly to the full implementation.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you all. A question for me that somebody asked in terms of revocation, if a service provider that's facing revocation is a member of the STI-GA board, does that not create a conflict? Certainly, and that's why we've got 12 STI-GA board members representing wireline, wireless, large, small, VoIP, et cetera. We've got a very diverse board set, and yes, I mean, with all the associations represented on the STI-GA board, it's likely at some point we may revoke a certificate of an association member, but that's why we have such a large and diverse board, because one vote is only one vote. And to date, the board has been tremendous about coming to agreement in a reasonable manner. So I haven't seen any issues to date, and I'm hoping that'll continue. All right, the last question, maybe the last question, depending upon how quickly we answer this. It says, what's the benefit of registering many SPCs instead of just one? If a company has multiple OCNs, let's see, it says, my understanding is that it's okay to sign all calls as one SPC. Not sure that question was as clear as it could be. Y'all get that? You want to answer that?
Yeah, I guess Carlos will have to get that when he looks at the recording. Looks like he's left. But I think what he's asking, this does come up. There's no reason why you cannot apply for a single SPC token and sign all your calls with that token. I mean, that's generally what we've seen most people do. You could consider multiple tokens as a way of, let's say, in the worst case that one of your tokens got, revoked. I mean, you for some reason, whether it's, a bad actor or whatever the reason. I mean, you do have other, SBC tokens available, but I think generally, at least from what we've seen from an implementation standpoint, is that folks will register a single SBC, and that may change over time. But I mean, right now that seems to be the current method or approach, and that works fine because there's no association to the number with that SPC at the terminating or verifying end. It's not it's not used in that manner. So.
Yeah, well, listen, we are up against the hour, and I don't want to keep anybody on for longer. So unless anybody had a really quick parting shot, I'm going to wrap us up. Okay. There's a lot more questions that I haven't gotten to. I apologize for that. We just had way too many questions. But it's great to see there's this kind of interest. There's a whole lot of questions about the FCC order. I'm not going to be able to answer those for you. I think you need to talk to the FCC or find an attorney who can give you more detail on the FCC orders and how that's all going to work. But I would like to thank everyone for all of the terrific questions. I know we didn't get enough time to answer all of them. We're going to have another webinar, and so you may be able to answer some of your webinars, your questions then, or you can email me directly as well. The next webinar in the series is actually going to cover the A to Z's of working with the certification authority. So we'll kind of take the next step in the process there. That's going to be January 21st next year at 2 p.m. Eastern. So go ahead and register that. It's the same link that you registered for this one. Again, for this one, you get the recording if you're registered, and if you're on here, you're registered. So you'll get the link to the recording for this. I want to thank all my panelists, Scott, Alec, Doug, Ken, and my unofficial panelist, Bob, there. I want to thank all you guys for being here and participating today. And on behalf of the STI-GA and ANIS, I want to thank everybody who joined us today. Have a terrific Christmas, Hanukkah, or whatever holiday you are celebrating, and a very safe New Year's, and please stay COVID-free. And we'll see you all again next year. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brian.